Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Namo.
Namo Namah.
Om. So there was a question from the Zoom room about what I was saying about turning the feet in slightly. So we just explore that a little bit with this context of Vedana that we've been talking about today. So just stand how you normally stand. So I normally stand about that, like this. I can feel like both of my feet like sticking outwards. So you'll have a sort of preferred way. Most of us have our feet sort of slightly out. So the idea with this is, so instead of having your feet out as we normally do, and instead of thinking, oh, it's the big toe that you want to face forward, it's just bringing it in. The idea is just to bring it in a little bit more than that. So it's the second toe that you're wanting to point forward. And what that should do is create some kind of sensation around your hips. So it might feel quite unpleasant to begin with, that sensation. And that's because you're not used to it. But now for me, and maybe for other people that do Tai Chi or Qigong regularly, actually bringing myself into that alignment is highly pleasurable, because my body then knows I'm going to be doing something that's going to feel nourishing for it. So it's a learned pleasure, pleasurable experience. But what it does physically is obviously it closes up the hips slightly, which means that you're more likely to keep your hips safe. So if you have all this open as we normally do, anything could happen up here. Yeah. If you close it up, it's a bit more like, oh, okay, I'm trying to keep stable. And the whole principle is keeping stability into the inside of the hip. So when I'm sort of doing that thing where I'm saying, now fold into the hip, you're sort of creating a crease here in your groin. So you're keeping everything, keeping your weight in the center and taking it down, keeping your weight in the center, rather than us going out to the side as we usually do in life, and overbalancing and overstraining knees and everything else. So obviously if you're dancing, you can do what you like with your hips, but for Tai Chi, it's kind of much more, particularly this flavor of Tai Chi I'm teaching you, it's much more contained in the center here. Okay. So just finding that standing like a mountain posture, ankles soft, knees soft, pelvis tucked under, electric spine rising up to the sky, the golden thread from the crown of the head drawing us up. Creating space for the armpits by lifting the shoulders, dropping them down the back. Arms rounded and relaxed, legs rounded and relaxed. And the kind of shape of the legs is like that, rounded. Same as the arms. There's a lot of circles in Tai Chi. Everything's sort of fairly circular. Engaging the breathing body. So maybe taking some deeper breaths and really getting a sense of that moving back into the heels as you breathe in. and forward into the balls of the feet, or sinking down into the knees as well as you breathe out. It's kind of a lift, open, expand, breathing in, sending down to the earth as you breathe out. And when you feel ready, you can play with the air in front of you, expanding out from the dantian. This is this area, the central core area of the body. Just let that expand and let the arms float up on that expansion on the in-breath. And all the time today, particularly noticing Vedana, using these movements as a tool to explore pleasant, unpleasant, neutral Vedana. And particularly, well, if there's unpleasant that's sore and painful, do less, so that it's less sore and painful. But if you find pleasant Vedana, focus on that. See if you can experience the joy, the happiness, the enthusiasm of moving your body in this way. And notice if your mind is trying to contract it and make it tight and make you feel like you might be getting something wrong. See if you can let that go. There's nothing to get wrong. None of you are going to hurt any aspect of your body, and that's really all that matters. It's just breathing. And exploring out to the side when you're ready. Just playing with the air. Using the earth to push. Using the fluidity of water in the body. Maybe notice if there's a little slight frown of concentration. I must concentrate on waving my arms in the air. See if you can smile, let that go. And then when you're ready, exploring the back of the body. So just whatever feels comfortable for you. Might be a very small movement. Almost like stirring the paint pot behind you. Or your body might feel like, yes, I just want to stretch my wings out. Just notice if you're clenching your toes while you do this one. It's fine if you are, if that feels good. And then just all three of those directions, front, side, back, in your own time, with your own breath. And when you're ready, bringing in all directions. And the arms can move independently of each other. And you can explore shifting weight from foot to foot if you want to. And you can explore up. How does that feel? And you can explore down. And you can go across your body. And you can turn round. And you can yawn and let go of the jaw as well. And if you find something that feels really nice, do it a few times. So just checking in for the last few moments. Is there any part of the body that hasn't yet been eased open, hasn't been paid attention to? Any part that still feels a bit neutral, that might need a bit of waking up or paying attention to? Yeah, you might want to rub it. And then gently coming back to standing like a mountain. Poised, confident, breathing on the earth. Noticing all sensations. Paying attention to all areas of the body. Noticing pleasant, unpleasant, neutral sensation. But particularly encouraging the pleasant during the Tai Chi session, just seeing if you can make the moves, allow the moves to nourish your body rather than being a force. Last thing we want is this to be something else to do, and to do correctly. So let's play Tai Chi Shibashi together. On your next in-breath, beginning. On the next in-breath, moving into opening the chest, so keeping the hands up at the heart, turning them palms inwards, opening the chest, relaxed shoulders, relaxed elbows. Using your own breath to open and close the body. Moving into painting a rainbow. So keeping the hands out to the side, palms face the sky, taking the weight over. Notice if the fire element has started up in your body with warmth. Next time you're in the center, easing forward into parting the clouds. So just making sure that when you're forwards, your knees are bending, so you're not using your back. So bending the knees as you come forwards. Next time, as you're coming down, just bringing the hands to hip height, palms facing the sky, moving into swinging arms. Breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out as you come forwards. So keeping the hips facing forwards at all times. The arms just swinging up. Sinking and rising in the knees. weight 50% in each foot all the way through this one. Moving into rowing a boat, letting the arms flop behind you, swing over, and as if you're sitting down into a chair behind you. Keeping the spine quite upright, but not straining the neck, allowing the neck to be loose. Moving into lifting the ball. So next time you're down, just coming straight back up and bringing the ball in, up and in towards the heart. Noticing the Vedana. How does it feel to play with this movement? Bringing both hands towards the heart again, a bit like the start of opening the chest, and doing turn to gaze at the moon, sinking down into the hip, turn, springing back, rising up, sinking. And again, if your feet are in that position we talked about at the beginning, you won't be able to move the hips very far. So they should lock into place, and then it's a twist with the back. Very gentle twist with the back. Again, noticing whether your body likes this move or dislikes it or likes parts of it. Notice whether your mind's having a field day of deciding whether you can or can't do it properly. And then going into waving hands in clouds. So the same movement, sink, 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 sink. It's a bit like push, as if your legs were full of water, like a hose pipe, and you push, and then push, push. Just making sure that the weight stays in the middle, so here, so not out or out. Down, down, down. That's it, that's better. That's good. Okay, and if you want to bring the arms in, It's just like, hello, hello. Again, it's as if you're holding a little ball in front of you. And your hands are moving up and down this central line. So although they look like they're doing something more than that, just swapping over in the front. Okay, shifting into punching, tucking the thumbs in. This is a clench and release. Gives your body practice at doing that sort of tightening up and then letting go. See if you can keep 50% weight in both legs at the same time. So it's just an up, down, straight in the middle move. And then letting go into flying wild goose. Relief. Notice if things are starting to ache. So my feet are starting to ache now, interestingly. And I'm labeling that slightly unpleasant. It's making me want to move them from standing and using so much energy. So notice which parts of the body are starting to protest a little bit, if any. Shifting into spinning wheels, so turning, taking the weight 80% into the left or right, whichever leg, doesn't matter. Exploring the space, and turning from the waist, taking care of the back, the neck, letting the head drop as you go through the bottom. And if you imagine there's a concrete tunnel like they had in playgrounds when I was a kid in the 70s, and you're going around the inside of the tunnel. So that's the sensation. So it's you're not feeling around the outside edge of something in this move. There's quite a different, you could try, if you put your intention on the outside, it feels quite different. Next time you're at the bottom, just pausing, allowing the head to relax, and then go back the other way. My feet have stopped aching now because I've changed the move. It's quite interesting. Next time you're at the bottom, pausing, rolling up into bouncing balls with step. So remember, it's not about lifting your foot off the floor, it's about sinking and feeling comfortable with having nearly all your weight or 100% of your weight in one foot and then the other. Breathe in, breathe out. And your intention is down, rooting down into the earth. Rooting down into the earth on the standing foot. Coming back to your standing like a mountain posture. Relaxing into pressing palms with calmness. Breathing in, drawing all the energy into the heart, sending it back to the earth. So although this is being played at the front of the body, it's going all the way through to the back of the body and out the back as well. So maintain awareness of the back of the body as you're doing this. And standing, breathing. Just noticing. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. I think some of you have just been watching the Tai Chi class, just finishing now. Well done, Sri Devi. Yes, so it will start at 4 o'clock as usual. They've just finished the Tai Chi. And Dhammarathi will be speaking again, and then a short break, and at 5:20 UK time, the meditation.
Wonderful to have Tai Chi. Actually, the Gita is very good. Yeah, thank you.
Good. I think there are about 5 of you at Tai Chi from the online group. A lot more in the shrine room, obviously. I don't have much to say to you this afternoon. We're all in a kind of silent mode here.
The retreat is in silence, is it?
The retreat's in silence. They've been in silence since yesterday afternoon. So they're in complete silence until Thursday, which makes a difference to the atmosphere here as well. There are actually 2 retreats going on here at the moment. I think the other retreat must be in silence as well, because I haven't heard anyone speaking. Well done, Petika.
Hello, good afternoon.
Vajramati looks like a ghost moving around in the...
It's fascinating to see Vajramati. Yes, that's true. When he's dancing, it's like a sky dancer.
Is it a meditation every afternoon now, Ratnagosha?
Yes.
After Dharma Bhatti's talk?
That's right, yes. Meditation every afternoon. And then the groups...
So only one group a day then?
That's right. The group in the evening is slightly longer than originally planned.
Right. And what will the group in the evening be? Will it always be meditation reviews, or will it be...
Yes. Meditation reviews as far as I know, yeah.
Right.
I think
Been caught up with work.
I think they came last night, didn't they, to tell you?
They did. They explained it very fully last night, yeah.
Hello, Ken Jyoti.
What are you going to do on your birthday?
The community here are having a special lunch for me.
Oh, great.
Apart from that, I'm getting some new spectacles tomorrow morning, so I'll be in Specsavers.
Not a Zimmer frame then.
Just new specs.
Is it a milestone birthday?
I'll be 66. It's a milestone in the UK because that's when you get your pension.
And your bus pass?
And your bus pass, yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. Although there are no buses here.
You need to come back to Cambridge, Ratnagosha, and use the buses in Cambridge.
Yes.
That's a beautiful wooden rupa. Do you know anything about it?
This one here, I know it. It probably came from Windhorse Trading when Windhorse Trading closed down. There were lots of rupas like this in Cambridge, so it may have come from there. In which case, it would have been bought in Thailand, probably at some point. It is really nice. I love the wood. So soft, kind of soft feel to it. Yeah. It's got a lovely expression as well.
And Bodhi trees to the left and right.
Yes. Oh yes, I'm sitting beneath the Bodhi tree. Hello, Pranyamai.
I take it when I said I was not listening to the radio and you said, are you watching television, that wasn't a personal slight of my myself.
No, it was just my attempt to be witty. Don't worry.
I thought it was yours. Yeah.
Hello, Nagamudra.
Hello, Ratnagosha. Hi.
Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah, and everyone.
Oh, Badger Chakshu is back with us.
Hello, Ratnagosha.
Hi. Did you enjoy the Tai Chi?
I'm not sure.
Sure. You'll have to try it again tomorrow to figure
No,
out.
I've been coming every day, but it does put a fair bit of strain on my upper legs.
All right.
I think I'm just getting used to it, or maybe bending too much or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just finding trying to coordinate the moves the most difficult part.
Yeah. It is difficult if you've got a small screen because you can't see it so clearly. We've got this huge screen in front of us here, so we can see it really clearly.
Is it all quiet at Adhisthana besides this retreat?
There are two retreats. There's this retreat and another one, a small retreat with Chandra Prabha and Bodhivangsa,
Oh, okay.
the endlessly fascinating crime. But there are just 9 of them here. And it is very quiet because everyone's in silence.
That's nice.
Do you know, Ratnagosha, if Divan can read and translate Pali? Divan.
Divan, yes, as far as I know, yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. I'm going to ask him if he would translate 2 or 3 sentences for me.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he will. Yeah. Okay, I can see Damarati arriving in the shrine room. So soon you'll be going over there. I won't be with you this evening. Kema Banda will be here, and I won't be with you tomorrow, but I'll be back on Wednesday morning. And I
Happy
expect you all.
birthday
To
to you.
you.
Happy birthday to
you.
Happy
Happy
birthday,
birthday,
dear Ratnagosha.
Happy birthday
to
to
you.
Oh my God.
That's just
I
send off.
expect all of you will have halos by the time I see you again. So. Thanks for that.
Bye.
Enjoy your day.
It sounded horrible, but thank you anyway. Okay, we're going over now to the shrine room.
Okay, let's kick off. What we're going to do now, this morning we came on to the feelings section of the sutta, and we're going to look a bit more closely at the text, and in a way kind of pick up the themes that Vidyamala and Sona touched on a bit more experientially. It's a comparatively short section. It's much shorter than the body section, so with a bit of luck I'll have less to say. Couple of things, after that I'll give a bit of a talk. After the talk, as we did yesterday, we'll have a bit of time for Q&A with the team, and again we'll include people who are on the Zoom end of the retreat. Hridaya Gita at the back with her iPhone ready for questions. Yeah, it's the little hat. Yes. Yeah. So we've got to figure out a way of the tech team talking to the people in here. We're managing to explore all the different ways you can screw up putting on a Wi-Fi microphone. So Patrick will let us know if we've found yet one more. Another couple of wee diversions, if you don't mind. One was in the team meeting that we had at the start of this retreat. Vidyamala was telling us a story. We're talking about working with unpleasant Vedana. And one of the stories was of a Satipatthana retreat that happened at Taraloka. And one of the ways they got people to work with unpleasant Vedana was to organize grass cutting outside the shrine room during one of the meditation sessions. So people were sitting with the lawnmower going during the practice session, and the instruction was probably more polite than suck it up, but sort of work skillfully with your mental states. I just wanted to say we are nowhere near as organized as Taraloka, and it's just a fortuitous accident that we've got the grass cutting going on the silent period of the retreat, and the instruction's the same. Just watch what arises in relationship to the experience and do what seems most skillful. Other little aside I wanted to mention was you've all probably been fretting since this morning about the translation and etymology of independent, and I didn't want to leave that as an open loop, so I did look it up again. The Pali for that phrase and the refrain that one dwells independent is anisito sa viharati. And anisito is it's an adjective meaning, another translation for it is not attached. And the etymology of it is that it's the past participle of a verb meaning to lean. It has a prefix, so the verb to lean is, the root of it is si. It's got a prefix ni, which means to down. So putting those two together, the nisi means to lean down, and anisita means not to lean down on something. So it's an instruction not to lean down on something. And usually the context is that it's describing a relationship of not being attached. So it's a relationship of not attached to whatever's arising in experience. So I hope that puts your mind at ease. Good. And it takes us nicely on to what this next session of the sutta is talking about. So the text itself, Vidyamala read this morning, but it starts off how, monks, does one in regard to feelings abide contemplating feelings? When feeling a pleasant feeling, one knows I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling an unpleasant feeling, one knows I feel an unpleasant feeling. When feeling a neutral feeling, one knows I feel a neutral feeling. So that's the first half of the teaching. And the second half is this worldly and unworldly. So when feeling a worldly pleasant feeling, one knows I feel a worldly pleasant feeling. When feeling an unworldly pleasant feeling, when feeling a worldly unpleasant feeling, feeling an unworldly unpleasant feeling, worldly neutral, unworldly neutral, one knows that's what we're feeling. So it's, in a sense, it's two separate instructions. One is what's going on right now. What's the feeling there in experience? And the second one, the second question is pay attention to the quality of the feeling. So not just pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, but going back to this idea right at the start of the retreat, that what you've got in the sutta is a description of an unfolding process of conditionality. You've got conditionality that keeps the mind trapped in dukkha, and you've got an unfolding process that liberates the mind from dukkha. So what you're doing in this stage is you're starting to notice moment to moment whether the quality of our response traps us in dukkha or is moving towards release from it. So it's not just a kind of technical curiosity. You're actually starting to look at that lovely little phrase in the bodhicitta practice, that all beings desire happiness and act in ways that cause us suffering. So you're just starting to notice if your actions are in line with that impetus towards happiness, or if we're acting in ways that cause us suffering. And Vidyamala was saying this morning that this is a crucial step in the sutta. And I think that's right. I think any treatment of the whole process of the Dharma regards this step as a crucial step. You know this from all of your Buddhist study, but you know the Bhante talks about the wheel of life, and the wheel of life in its traditional depictions has a Buddha in the top right corner, and the Buddha's pointing to this the nidana between feeling and craving. And why he's pointing to it is this is the point of liberation. That this is where we move off the wheel. This is where we can start to break that habitual cycle of response that causes suffering, basically. So this is how the Satipatthana Sutta comes to that crucial point between the innocent experience or the innocent openness to experience and the quality of response and how we respond to that experience and that moment of choice that we have in how we respond. So this is a crucial step because it's the opening up, the possibility of opening up that moment of choice in how we respond to experience. I was reading, I think it's a really interesting book, a man called Robert Wright, who's I think an evolutionary psychologist, and he writes, I think, very well on the anusayas, and the anusayas are habitual patterns of experience that the mind runs. So craving is an anusaya, aversion's an anusaya. It's the kind of habitual way we respond to experience. And reading Wright's book, I think it was the most shocking sense that I got of how deep the anusayas go and how deep some of those patterns are. And he used this quite trivial example. It was a bit of psychological research into marketing. but that there was a bit of testing done on people after they had watched The Shining and after they had watched Before Sunrise. And The Shining, if you don't know it, is Kubrick's horror movie with Jack Nicholson. And Before Sunrise, I think it's Nora Ephron. Not sure. Anyway, but a sort of rom-com. Better than that. Good. I don't doubt that. No criticism implied. All I was going to say was the impact that they had on the mental states of the people that were interviewed afterwards, and how people saw the world after seeing The Shining, how they saw the world after seeing Before Sunrise, the emotional relationship to their experience, and this was the marketing part of it. The choices that they made having seen those movies were significantly different. And Wright goes on to say, nobody who watched those movies had consciously chosen to be fearful or to be romantic. It just came out of a stimulus that had set up a whole module of behaviors, perceptions, attitudes that pushed the mind in one direction. And watching the other movie pushed the mind in another direction. And Wright's nice little summing up of it was that in the face of strong Vedana, you can describe your experience as the brain being under new management. You've got a whole independent little pattern of perception, response, and behavior coming. And what the tradition is saying is that's our habitual relationship to experience. Stimulus comes in, that there's a response that most of the time is not conscious, and most of the time is involved in the deep habits of confusion, ignorance, aversion, and craving, even if we can't always track it, even if we're not always conscious of it. So this is starting to address that, and it's starting to address it in a couple of different ways. The sort of classic description of this, the reason that the Buddha is pointing to that link between feeling and craving is that basically awareness starts to break the habit. If we start to take awareness into experience, rather than the mind acting in automatic, we open up a bit of space and we open up a moment of choice about how we're going to respond to our experience, which is why it's so significant. So, a little bit of seminar from Bhante. In the seminar, Bhante says, the practice of recollecting feelings is intended to help us be aware of our feelings before an emotional reaction sets in. If we can distinguish between the feelings we receive as impressions, on the one hand, and what we make of them, on the other hand, we can take responsibility for them while not suppressing them. We need to know what we feel if we're to direct the flow of our emotional life in a positive way. And then he goes on to say, this is quite difficult to do. Most of the time, our feelings get lost in our emotional reactions to them. Our natural tendency is to want to get away from a feeling if it's painful, to want more of it if it's pleasant. Before we know where we are, we've thus shifted from the simple experience of pleasure or pain into some form of craving or hatred. And then he goes on, in a way, this is the important practical point. The practice, therefore, is to keep returning to the simple feeling. And Bhante says, allowing no space for habitual reactions to establish themselves. And I found myself thinking, or creating space for more aware, more creative response to establish themselves. So the awareness of how we feel is that opening up of the space. And excuse me, just to sort of labour the point, there's a couple of reasons why this is so significant. And one is that feelings are the drivers of perceptions and behaviours. So a lot of what we do if you start to attend to it, comes out of the impact of sensations on us and how we feel about it. They're the drivers. So if you start to attend to it, you're attending to what it is that's driving the whole mental states and actions that follow from it. And in the Anapanasati Sutta, feelings are described as chitta sankara. And chitta sankara, you can translate as the shape the mind takes, or you can translate it as what it is that shapes the mind. So feelings are chitta sankara. You're starting to attend to what it is that's shaping the mind and how we respond and interact with the whole field of experience. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say, this idea of you're starting to attend to what's usually below awareness and starting to take attention to it, to make it conscious and to open up that moment of choice. And there's a second reason, I think, that attention to feelings is so important. Second thing is, it's kind of easily accessible. A lot of the time, if you're trying to follow your mental states, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody in the room, depending on my experience, but I can quite often get lost in my own mental states. And if you were to ask me if the main driver for what I can see as an unpleasant mental state was craving or aversion, I couldn't reliably tell you all the time. Quite often you've got quite a mental construction going on. And one of the things about feeling tone is it's straightforward. One of my favourite bits of Dharma, and I'm sure this is because it speaks to me in a way that's quite pertinent, but that lovely idea from the mind training verses of train with slogans, right? So there are certain teachings that are just so kind of useful as mnemonics that it's worth having them to hand. And one of my slogans is, whenever disturbing emotions arise, may I firmly face them and avert them, remembering they will cause pain for me and for others. So I don't always know what my mental state's doing, but I know if I feel disturbed or not. And I know if I feel connected and calm or not. So underneath all the complexity, just to tune in with yourself and how do you feel? Do you feel connected? Do you feel disconnected? Do you feel alive? Do you feel disturbed? So something about attending to the quality of your mental states, to the feeling tone of the mental states, gives us a kind of baseline about whether or not our experience is unfolding in a way that's skillful or unfolding in a way that's unskillful. So that's the kind of second practical implication, I think, of feelings. Second part of the sutta moves on not just to this simple pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, but worldly and unworldly. And Vidyamala covered this really evocatively this morning, but just to return to it, the Pali for this is samisa and niramisa, and a couple of different translations on it, but one translation is dependent on the body or not dependent on the body. And the implication is, again, it's this shift, not from the objects of experience. It's not so much about what it is that we're attending to that makes it worldly or unworldly. Again, it's starting to move awareness back to the quality of our response. And is our response basically having the flavour of craving, aversion, or confusion, in which case you're looking at a samisa response? Or does it have the flavour of, rather than craving, a certain kind of openness, a certain kind of contentment, rather than aversion and pushing away, does it have the flavour of connection and kindness? And rather than confusion or delusion, does it have the flavour of clarity? And it's that quality of the flavour of the response that makes it worldly or unworldly. Now, practically speaking, certain stimuli are more likely to create a worldly response than not. The shining might create an aversive response somewhere in there. So you'd want to train a little bit before you saw too many Jack Nicholson movies. But, so it's not that the object's not significant, but the whole point of this bit of the practice is that you're starting to create a quality of response that's not leaning on, it's not dependent on the nature of the experience that we're responding to. So you want to be responding to a pleasant experience with an openness and an appreciation, but not shutting down into craving. And you're starting to respond to an unpleasant experience with an openness, a curiosity, a sense of connection, a sense of compassion, even rather than the habit of closing down. So you're starting to establish a quality of awareness that's more and more independent of the stimulus that's triggering it. So you're moving out of the anusayas, you're moving out of the habit into a quality of response that's much more directed by the awareness itself. So that's what this second section is getting at. And it's a training, right? You get it really explicitly again in the Anapanasati Sutta, that one trains oneself sensitive to what's arising. You breathe in, you breathe out, and you'll lose it, and you remember, and you lose it, and you remember. But just gradually, you're starting to establish more and more of a tendency to respond out of awareness and openness. And we're training ourselves to do that. And the sutta, going back, well, both the Satipatthana Sutta, but to my mind, even more kind of precisely the Anapanasati Sutta, gives you a bit of a description of the process that the mind goes through in moving from habit into that kind of openness. So I wanted to revisit that's Anapanasati Sutta structure that Sona touched on this morning. And I wanted to do it not so much as a particular meditation instruction. I think what you get in the Anapanasati Sutta is a description of the process that the mind goes through when it's liberating itself. And I'd suggest the necessary process that the mind goes through when it's liberating itself. The same ground that's covered in the Anapanasati Sutta gets covered later in the Satipatthana Sutta and the awakening factors. Basically the same ground gets covered in the positive nidanas. And what you've got in all of those is a description of the process that the mind, I'd even go as far as to say the mind has to go through. It's trying to describe a process rather than trying to necessarily give you a meditation technique. And the Anapanasati Sutta, I was around when it first started to get some attention. It largely came from Viveka, and who was kind of working with it in the States about 20 years ago. And she wrote to Bhante just saying, look, I'm doing this practice, I'm interested in practicing it, interested in teaching it, what do you think? And I heard a little bit of the correspondence. And Bhante, in his response to Viveka, was saying that he thought that to some extent the Anapanasati Sutta was just describing that the natural process that happens as you start to take awareness into your experience. And he had seen it not so much as a set of instructions, as a description of a process that happened naturally. And I think that's true. I think it is that. I think also as a practice, there's something in taking awareness into each stage of that unfolding process makes it clearer and makes it a stronger current in our experience. So the reason I mention that is to say that whether or not you find the Anapanasati instructions a helpful way of approaching a meditation practice, what they're describing is something that's more or less the shape that any spiritual change will take, like the kind of process of the mind waking up will take. So I wanted just to look at it from the point of view of this process of the mind unhooking from the objects that determine it to the quality of response itself. We started off, I mean, even if you go back to what we did this morning, I think there's a really fundamental aspect to Buddhist practice, which is just that you pay attention to what's happening. You're starting to notice what your experience is like. So that little exercise of aware of your body, aware if it's pleasant, if it's unpleasant, or if it's neutral, that step from not attending to attending, I think it's a crucial step. It's how we start to move out of the habits. So the body, the breath is that doorway into connection. So whatever route it takes, whatever practice we use, there's some route into connecting to our experience as it is. The next step, the breath in the body, is into the body calming. And as Sona was saying, that there's a sort of natural process that happens in my own experience is that a lot of the time I don't attend to my experience much. I don't attend to my body that much. I'm sure there are people who are far more attentive than I am. And to start to breathe into my body is like a deep relief. It's just like connecting to that base level of my experience. And there's something of the awareness going into the experience that it feels like you're joining up. It's something you were separate from, you're connected to. And that sense of connection has a feeling tone, I think. Bhante talks about mindfulness as this process of integration, that as you take awareness into what's going on, all these fragments of your experience, all these fragments of your energy, you make connection with, and they start to come together into a more and more unified experience of ourselves. So you go from all over the place, all these little independent modules, to something that's more and more connected, more and more whole. That sort of ring bells for people. People recognize that in some way in your own experience. So first of all, the awareness in. The awareness starts to allow things to come into relationship, allow things to come into awareness. And there's a feeling tone to that. And the feeling tone to that is piti. And this is my own particular take on piti. I don't think this is the only way of reading it, but I was thinking as I was doing the practice this morning, but piti is not just random pleasure, right? It's what it feels like to be connecting to parts of yourself that you haven't been connected to before, and qualities of energy in yourself that you haven't been connected to before. And there's something about that point of connection. You sort of open up a channel that allows the life in that part of us, the energy in that part of us to come into relationship, to come into awareness. And it can even be a wee bit of a shock. You know, it's something that we've not been that familiar with. And opening up to it, there can be a punch to it, you know. So on the one hand, it's pleasurable, but on the other hand, it can almost be a little bit shocking. And you know, sometimes it's nothing like as strong as that. It's just the body relaxes a little bit, and it's a bit of a relief to feel that. So it can be very subtle, or it can be something that we've not had much access to, that we've suddenly or gradually got access to. There's an inflow of energy, and the vitality, the pleasure of being more alive is what PT is trying to describe, I think. So it's the feeling tone of what it's like to start to open up to and start to connect to our experience. And again, it's something that's inner directed rather than outer determined. It's not that there's an objective experience creating that. It's our deepening capacity to attend to our experience that's opening up that space. So again, it's something that's more and more independent of what it is that we're attending to. So that I think is PT. And I wanted to say something about sukha. So where the Anapanasati Sutta goes next, where the awakening factors go, where the positive nidanas go, they all go to this experience of the PT calming down and stabilizing. And in my experience, I think I got quite confused reading about PT as bliss, and especially kind of waiting for something out there to turn up looking like bliss. Isn't an experience I've got a lot of familiarity with. But I think what you've done so far in the sutta gives you a clue about what's going on in the stage of sukha. And what I would suggest, like, this is at least one way of thinking about sukha, that if PT is the sort of shock of connecting to new aspects of ourselves or a sort of deeper experience of ourselves, what sukha is that capacity to be open to our experience becoming a deeper, a more established and a more stable part of our experience. And it's the openness that makes it blissful, not what it is that we're opening up to. And if I can be a wee bit personal for a minute, like my mum died last year and Bante died, 2018. And actually my experience of both of those was quite similar. So when Bante died, so first of all, you had the shock, like we were here, I was looking out the beams into the courtyard when the ambulance turned up, and then 24 hours later, we get news that he's dead. So first of all, you've got the shock of it. And I'm pleased to say my first instinct was to want to sit down and to meditate. So I sat down, wanted to meditate, and there's the shock, there's the grief, and then to my real surprise, what came up was this deep, deep gratitude and an appreciation for how much my life had been shaped by what Bante had done. And it didn't make the grief any less, right? So like somehow the grief was there, but the grief in a way was just a measure of the depth of the loss. But the appreciation, the gratitude, the sense of opening up to something that was still there was just as strong. And when my mum died, it was the same, like it's such a central formative relationship. So the first response is grief. But what I realized was that my spiritual training wasn't that I was able to replace the grief with bliss. My spiritual training was that I was able to be totally with the grief. And in that grief and underlying the grief was this deep gratitude and deep love that were just other dimensions of the same experience. But what it made me realize is that the training is, again, you got the hint of it in the practice this morning. It's this capacity to be curious about, connected to, available to whatever it is that's arising. Whether it's pleasant experience that we usually try and cling to, whether it's unpleasant experience that we usually resist, it's the clinging stopping and the resistance stopping and the openness and the responsiveness that's the bliss. It's nothing to do with the object of the experience. It's that capacity for openness and responsiveness that I think is the core of sukha. So not an object of experience. You're not sitting there feeling unusually cheery. It is just a more and more established capacity to respond out of that depth of openness. And again, it's a training. So one trains oneself sensitive to sukha. I breathe in, I breathe out. And it's a capacity that doesn't arise by accident and doesn't arrive at random. So it arises out of the thing that went before it, which was the opening up to parts of ourselves that we're usually not connected to. And that arose in dependence on the attention that we paid to the breath and the body, and the letting go into something a bit calmer, a bit more open, a bit more relaxed. So you're setting up a process of conditions that gradually come to a sort of capacity for a stable capacity to be attentive to and responsive to whatever's arising, without that openness and responsiveness being shaped by the object that you're attending to, if that makes sense. So that gives you a clue as to where the next two verses go in the Anapanasati Sutta. Again, forget whether or not the Anapanasati Sutta is a helpful framework for you, but it's describing a psychological process that, however you practice, there's going to be an analogy to. So the next couple of verses in the Anapanasati Sutta are sensitive to mental processes, sensitive to chitta sankara, and then calming chitta sankara. And if you don't mind, I want to quote Analayo here. Analayo uses a beautiful image that he pinched from the Karaniya Metta Sutta when he's describing this part of the practice. And he's saying basically at this point, you're connected to the breath, you're connected to the body, you've got a quality of openness that's becoming more and more stable. And that's the basis out of which we start to come into a new relationship to our experience. The sort of balance starts to shift. And rather than the object of experience shaping where the mind goes, it's the quality of emerging openness that shapes where the mind goes. And it's stable enough to be able to attend to what's arising. So Analayo uses the Karaniya Metta image and says it's like a mother playing with her children. So you watch the children caught up in their games, but you don't need to join in. So you're sitting there and you're just aware of what arises in experience. And it might be a pleasant sensation or an unpleasant. It might be a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant. It might be a pleasant train of thought or an unpleasant. But you don't get caught. The mum doesn't decide to go and have a go in the swings. Right? You're in love with what you're looking at. You really care about what you're looking at, but you don't need to get sucked into it. So you're setting up this capacity of attention that's available to whatever's arising. And you're just paying attention to what does it feel like. And whenever disturbing emotions arise, you've got a clue that you're caught. And the practice is just take a step back. What lets you connect back to that quality of openness? And if you need to go back another step, what's your body doing? What's your breath doing? How do you set up the stability? And then out of that stability, you come back into relationship to your experience. And you've got this paradox that I think you got really clearly in what Vidyamala did earlier today, that paradoxically, that attitude of curiosity and openness means that you're far more aware of and far more connected to what it is that you're paying attention to. You're more alive to the unpleasant experience, but it doesn't shape the awareness. You've got this paradox of it's not a cutting off. If anything, it's a level of clarity, a level of connection that's deeper than we usually have available to us, but at the same time that capacity for awareness isn't shaped by what we're attending to. So it's a sort of win-win, actually. You're both more aware, more connected, and more independent of what it is that you're doing. And I want just to come back in the end to this idea that it's a training. Like, one of the things that I love about this sutta, I've known since I first came across any Buddhist teaching that I'm supposed to be unhooking from craving and aversion and responding out of something more creative. And it was so helpful for me to get an instruction manual of what that looks like. It just tells you how to create the connection, how to practice the stability, how to come into relationship out of that stability, how to notice when you lose it, and how to come back to it. So whether or not the Anapanasati structure or the Satipatthana structure is the structure that we use, that move into a mind more and more independent of what it's attending to is going to be present in any process of spiritual growth. And you've got this lovely step-by-step description of what it looks like. That makes sense? And again, you're back on this central ground. This is the step that you take that gets you off the wheel. This is the step that starts to free our mind, free our awareness from what we habitually respond to out of craving and aversion. That this is one way of structuring the training that starts to move us into that space. All right, so let's pause there and maybe a few minutes for Q&A if there is, if the team can come up this end. Hridaya Gita on the Zoom chat line. There might or might not be any questions. That's a fair bit, again, to absorb, that between what Vidyamala did this morning, what Sona did, what I've done, what Hridaya Gita's done, there may be. Kamrashi.
Firstly, I just want to say I'm really appreciative and excited by the discussion on Kriti and Sukha. As it was like, it's giving me a handle on something, so I'm just really appreciative of that. My question is that sometimes what I've been noticing today is there might be a sudden stimulus that I find extremely unpleasant. It's like a door slamming or something, and I can't find the gap between experiencing the unpleasant Vedana and my response to it. What I can sometimes do when I'm on the ball is notice my response and then notice how the unpleasantness of the response, and respond with anger, say, realizing, yeah, I'm the one being burnt by it. So, comments, thoughts, suggestions?
Can you literally repeat the question? Okay, so first of all, Dharmashri said that she's really appreciating the discussion on Priti and Sukha today. And then secondly, there's a stimulus, something like a door banging, and there's an immediate reaction. You didn't use that word, but there's an immediate, like you might get angry. And you can notice that. And that's unpleasant as well. So you can see you're burning yourself with your anger. And then any comments. So I suppose my response, have I summarised that adequately? Good. My response would be, well, I appreciate you saying, because I think it's raising this thing that we can think we got this sort of one opportunity. We get something comes in that's unpleasant, and if we miss the opportunity to sort of catch it, then somehow we've missed the gap. But you can always insert a gap. So you notice the anger, you come back to the body, where am I feeling that in the body? You breathe in, you breathe out, and so you, rather than catching it at the door bang, you catch it a bit further along, and then you do all the same process that we're teaching of inserting space, coming back to your basic experience. So you're not then feeding the anger. So I think in reality, for most of us, that is our practice. We're very rarely just catching the basic sensation in daily life, but we can notice all the times when we're caught up in craving, and we're caught up in aversion, and we're just really confused. Notice that and think, okay, come back, reset. What's my basic sensation? What am I feeling right now? So we're sort of interrupting that cycle of reactivity. I think that's the practice for most of us. And then I think that's beautiful what Dhammarato was saying about the mother watching the children, not getting too sucked in, but also very loving. The mother is very loving of the kids. So rather than thinking, oh no, I've blown it and I've got really angry, it's like, oh wow, I'm aware I'm angry. That's brilliant. What can I do to sort of de-escalate it right now? So that would be my response. Anything to add, anybody?
I suppose my response is that I think what I do is, if I do something, there's one thing I tend to do quite often, that's hit my big toe on the foot of a wooden bed at home in the dark, and I'm tired. I can't really work on. I just know there's pain in my toe, and I sometimes might use an expletive, but just being aware of that, and then other things like that happening, I think actually you gradually, you are training yourself. I mean, when we say it's a training, it's not like you're really working hard in the middle of the night to work on your response. You just notice, oh yeah, I did it again. And I think it's more, that's what it's like for me at first, is, oh, I did it again, I got angry, and then I thought, in what ways I could get my own back on the foot of the bed or something, and you notice that, and gradually it just seems to stop. It's as though the gap begins to manifest. That's at least my experience of it, and sometimes I can track it, and I can say, right, well, I'm not gonna write that email, and just let it go, for instance. Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm. There's a follow-up question from that, okay. From Amaya. Would you say, with working with a deep sanskara is a lifetime or lifetime's work? So finding the gap is a long process, ?
Don't want to be glib about it. I suppose the first thing that came to my mind was keep on doing it and see what happens, see how long it takes. Second thing that came to my mind was, I'm definitely working with patterns of behaviour that are pretty deep-rooted, it seems, and take time to work on. And I suppose sort of two things about that. One is something about the process itself being a satisfying process. It's not that I'm trying not to be too sort of cliched about this, but there's something about the living engagement of awareness with experience, and the capacity for openness that I think practice does make stronger, that in a sense, whatever arises, even if it's some quite deep habits, there's something in that attending to and availability to what's emerging that has its own sort of taste of freedom about it. Like it's in itself, it's the process, I think, has its own life and its own satisfaction. And more you're dealing with again, I don't want to be glib about it, you're dealing with a habit, but the habit less and less is the determining thing in your experience. Also, a lot of habits seem to me to have two sides. I keep on thinking of a friend of mine who is unskillfully self-deprecating and has a genius capacity for empathy. And I think quite often what we judge as a fault or a habit, there are elements in that are expressive of values. So I guess it's just wanting to be a little less black and white about some of our psychic habits. Any other?
Another thing I found helpful is that there are habits like the example I gave was one of anger. I'm much more likely to get angry and be aware than I am of craving. If I have lots of habits of craving as well, but I kind of quite like those in a way, and in a way I have to work on those a bit more. And I think it's quite, sometimes people say you're either a hate type or a craving type, or there's apparently not so many confused types, although we're all confused. But I think in some ways just being aware of that actually is helpful, because then you the more you're kind of looking out for these things, the more you're training yourself in mindfulness. I don't know if that was helpful.
I've got a thought, because I think it's sort of the Dharma is so paradoxical, isn't it? Because all this is this training principle to free ourselves. So of course we want to be free. We want to be free in the future. So we've got some unpleasant samskara that feels very, very deep. And maybe we get frustrated because it keeps on coming back and it feels like we're not getting rid of it. Which is very understandable. And what Dhammarati was saying, we actually only live our lives now. So if you're actually aware of that samskara now and bringing a little more kindness or love to it, that's all that matters. Like how long it's going to last, will I get rid of it now or in multiple lifetimes? Maybe what came to my mind was, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether it's now or next week or next year or million lifetimes, because actually we're only living now. So if you're able to get a little bit of love in there, a little bit of space in there now, I think that's all that matters. And however long it takes will take care of itself. I don't know if that's just, and that's where it's paradoxical. We're practicing in order to train ourselves for some future freedom, and actually we're only living our lives now, and how do we behave right now that's where the freedom will come from. It is mysterious, the whole time space thing.
We just want our chocolate cake now, don't we?
Pardon?
We just want our chocolate cake now.
Do we?
Now Sona's brought the tea break into our awareness. Maybe one more. And then
Maya just said thank you. Very helpful, thank you.
Oh, good.
There is another question online.
Yeah, is there anyone in the room who's got anything from today? Yeah, Vajrasara?
It's not burning, that what it is. It was partly appreciation, out of which come up the query, about the sutta, particularly what you said, Tamati, just now, and your experience of the mix of grief and gratitude. And certainly recognise that, and myself and other people I know have struggled with some of the words used on the spiral path, like rapture, setting the bar quite high, really, and bliss. I've appreciated in the past it being pretty, being described more like pleasure and sukha as happiness. But even happiness wouldn't describe the experience we just talked about. I was wondering, because then people can think I don't have experience of the spiral path, or conditionality, if you like. And so I was kind of thinking, could we translate it as something like fulfilling, authentic, open experience or something? Do you know what I mean? Because grief is quite satisfying, fulfilling. But you wouldn't class it as bliss or happiness, would you? I don't know, I'm just wondering, any thoughts?
I had a chance to say my piece. Go on.
Well, I'll just translate it. I think to really summarize what you were saying, it's about language and the language that we use for these more expansive states, like the spiral path. And you said, like, rapture sets the bar quite high. Well, I think it sets the bar very high. And then that's very interesting, wondering, because what Dharmarati was talking about for sukha was coming out of grief. And Vajrasara was saying grief can be quite satisfying, which I would agree with. So could we use other words, I guess, is what you're asking. I mean, it'd be interesting to know where translations like rapture came from. Like, who invented the word rapture for piti? Somebody somewhere along the line obviously decided that. I mean, speaking personally, that I increasingly think of them as, I think, fulfilling, satisfying, and really, I guess all I'm ever interested in, leaving aside the words and stages even, is, am I opening or am I closing down? That's all I'm really watching in my experience. And if I'm opening, then that's a spiral path, really, isn't it? Because I'm moving beyond these bound states to something a little more open. And that can be very kind of modest, even ordinary. And I think in my own, often in my teaching, I try to sort of introduce the idea. I think it's probably always present. If we learn to look at our experience in the right way, there's always something in our experience which has got that flavor of opening up rather than closing down. So I think part of the skill is learning how to really find that. And I think it's often very, very ordinary, because I used to get baffled by rapture and things, thinking, well, I've never had that bliss. Yeah, they're very big words, aren't they? But I think they arise, or whatever the quality is just, it often starts with something that can feel quite ordinary. And then there's the mystery, that something that's very emotionally full, like grief, can be very, very satisfying. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's, so sort of openness rather than contractions, I think, the felt experience. But I don't know how we're going to go about rewriting the terminology of the spiral path. But I think
maybe it might be worthwhile remembering the Buddha was talking to monks who were, sort of full-time meditators, and maybe they had a different experience. Maybe they started off quite happy, a bit different from sort of most of our experiences these days. Is that there may be a whole kind of shift in, like, history and culture and people's way of being, that the words then meant something much more for that group of people than the way we use them for this group of people, for instance.
I think as well, it's one of the reasons why it's worth going back to the Pali very often. That I think, if you think what you've got with a lot of these early translations as a late 19th century or early 20th century English-speaking culture trying to find its cultural equivalents for language that came out of a community of meditators, and they're going for the best local equivalent, but there might not be a good local equivalent. And if you can start to get at what the Pali is getting at, and things like dukkha and sukha, they're familiar enough, they're not complex, they're maybe more accurately describing the experience than the best English analogue that we can find for it. And just think, if dukkha means dissatisfaction, Dukkha and sukha are antonyms. So sukha is the opposite of the dissatisfaction that dukkha is trying to point to. Anyway, we should stop and have some tea. I'm sorry that there's not... Oh, should we do one more from online?
It's fine. Yeah, I think we've got time.
Let's do one more and we can hold one over, I think.
Anaryo speaks about Vedana arising from mental events that don't have a significant physical component. Can we work with such Vedana without looking for a response in the body?
I won't have a go at that. I don't really understand that. So I sort of explored it quite a lot. Can you have a Vedana of nothing in the body? And I don't get it personally. But someone else.
So the question was that some mental states can have a feeling tone that's not experienced in the body. And speaking as a Scottish Protestant, I just want to affirm that that's true. And that quite often I feel I've got easier access to the feeling tone of a mental event directly than having it mediated through my body. If I work at it, I can find an equivalent in my body, but I feel it often I don't need to. That it's obvious from the direct thing itself whether I'm engaging with something pleasant or unpleasant, and the practice is the same. I'm noticing how I'm responding. Am I connecting? Am I resisting? What would support opening up to it? So wherever the feeling tone is most accessible, I would say go with what's available to you and work with your response to it. If the body makes it easily accessible, that's a fantastic, simple tool. If you've got access through other registers, then that works just as well. I'm kind of feeling a wish to let people have a bit of a break and refresh themselves. So let's pause there. Let's stop for maybe 15 minutes. So if we're back here at 20 past the hour, and finish with a meditation. Great, thank you very much. Thanks to people online for participating in this, and to Hridaya Gita for translating.
Okay. So you go on. Sir Gogan. Let's come back in here.
There's an image that the Buddha uses somewhere, I think it might be the Upanisa Sutta, where he's using a metaphor for the spiral path and describes it as a sort of sequence of rock pools. And one pool is gradually filled and it overflows and fills the pool below, which gradually fills and overflows and fills the pool below. And there's something in that image, I think, of a process sort of naturally coming into being dependent on what happens upstream. And there's something, I think, in that whole recognition of conditionality. Experience arises in dependence on conditions. And if we're not having a particular experience, like a meditation practice, sometimes just go back a step and fill that pool. First, just set up the conditions that allow the natural spilling out. So, if, for example, if there's not an immediate experience of pleasure, just go back a step, sort of connect to the breath, connect to the body, connect to that kind of curiosity and I'll keep on using the word connection, but that, what does it feel like to be connected? And out of that experience, just naturally, it's personally I prefer connected to disconnected, and I prefer how it feels. So just sort of getting the feeling tone of what it feels like for awareness to gradually sort of seep in to our experience a little bit more. And I think that means you never have to force a practice. Like in a way, just be sensitive to what's arising, be sensitive to what's emerging. Where does your awareness naturally want to go, and kind of work with the grain of what's emerging? So let's just revisit the Anapanasati Sutta. See if we can find a kind of simple thread in the middle of the apparent complexity of it. Just letting the practice ride the breath and bringing ourselves back to what it feels like to breathe in right now, what it feels like to breathe out. Just this basic training all the way through the practice of just learning to attend to our experience, noticing what that feels like. Just becoming curious about what this breath is like. Just exploring a bit if we need to. What helps you to connect a bit more fully with that experience of breathing? Maybe noticing where the experience is most distinct. If it helps to count after the breath. What helps you connect with the breath? If you feel ready, if it feels appropriate, just letting the breath go to the background, bringing the awareness of the whole body to the foreground. And the breath connecting us to that experience of our body. Sensitive to the whole body. I breathe in, I breathe out. Letting ourselves notice any natural experience of calm that's emerging. Aware of any changes in the breath, aware of any changes in the body. If it's helpful, just breathing in to any area of tension. And on the out breath, just letting it go. And just being alive to, receptive to the feeling tone of what it's like to be a bit more connected to ourselves. A bit more alive to the breath. A bit more alive to the vitality of the body. Just noticing anything in that experience that has that pleasurable flavour to it. Not trying to force anything. If you need to, just go back, just building that sense of connection. One trains oneself, sensitive to piti. I breathe in, I breathe out. Just allowing that intention to be available to our experience. Allowing that to become a bit more established in our awareness. Vidyamala said this morning that that more expansive state was available to us at any time. Just looking for that curiosity, that sense of attention, sense of connection. What would support that quality of expansiveness in our own awareness right now? Willingness to be with our experience just as it is. Even if it feels appropriate Just allowing ourselves to become more interested in, more absorbed in, more responsive to that experience. Sensitive to sukha. I breathe in, I breathe out. If we need to, just attending to the conditions that support that open awareness. Connection to our body, connection to our breath. Again, just noticing the feeling tone of that. To the extent that it's present, what does it feel like to be a bit more connected to the breath, to the body, a bit more connected to that open awareness? The sounds outside are catching your attention. What would it be like just to include that in your awareness? From that sense of connection, just broadening the awareness out to notice whatever's arising in our experience. This analogy of a mother attending to her children. What's it like to notice whatever's arising without being caught in it? Staying connected to the feeling tone of our experience. If our mind starts to feel disturbed, what would reconnect us to that breath, the body, the openness? From that sense of connection, what else is happening that needs to be included, wants to be acknowledged? Connected to it without being caught in it. If we don't feed those mental processes with the volitional energy, and in the same way that the breath calms, the same way that the body calms, just allowing the activity of the mind to naturally calm. If it feels appropriate, if we can do it without overcomplicating our experience, just becoming sensitive to that stream of experience that's going on. Aware of what arises in our awareness. Aware of it changing moment to moment. Available to whatever arises, without holding on to it, without resisting it. Where as it passes back into stillness. Nothing in our experience that we need to hold on to. Just relaxing back into that open awareness. And to finish, just allowing that openness to include everyone in the room. As I feel, so everyone in the room feels, so all beings feel. Alive to our shared painful experience, alive to our shared pleasurable experience. The shared move that we're making together into something a little more aware, a little more open. Just before we finish the practice, maybe just connecting to, again, what does that feel like? What's it like to engage with our experience now? What is there in our experience now that we can carry with us out of the shrine room, into the break, into the meal?